Midnight check-in. I keep the night at a boutique hotel because it pays the rent and because silence and I have an understanding. By 11, the lobby's velvet chairs stop trying to impress anyone. The orchids stop behaving like divas, and the chandelier looks less like jewelry and more like a constellation only I remember. Guests pad in on soft souls, drunk on celebration or disappointment, and I give each of them the same steady smile, the same practiced map to their rooms. The halcyon markets the rooms as sanctuaries. The word makes people behave, or else it makes them brave. On a Tuesday that had no business being dramatic, I was polishing the brass bell on the counter when a Polaroid drifted out from under the guest folio I'd been organizing. Someone had tucked it there like a tip. The picture was a rooftop greenhouse, the halcyon, unmistakable with its ribbed glass and the fern that never learns modesty. Two glasses on a low table clinked mid-sparkle, a woman's hand and a man's wrist captured in the act of not letting go. The hand wore a thin silver band that looked ordinary until you realized it kept appearing in my kitchen at home, curled around a mug, gesturing at the air, combing honey into tea. I recognized the small crescent scar near the knuckle, the one my wife Jenna had gotten from a bicycle fall in college, a souvenir she joked made her look like a cardinal had signed her. My thumb pressed so hard against the photo's white edge that I expected to leave a permanent fingerprint, an accusation in grease. A sound behind me made me set the picture faced on the way you do with bad news when a stranger walks into the room. "Night manager," the woman at the desk said, and I tried to make my voice the same friendly shape it always was. She was in her 30s, hair coiled into a messy knot, coat the color of storm glass. Pretty only if you were paying attention, dangerous if you were. She didn't offer a name. "Can I help you?" I asked. "You already have," she said, eyes flicking to the edge of the Polaroid peeking from beneath the folio. "I think you found something of mine." "How do you figure?" I said, not moving. She smiled without her mouth. "Because I left it for you." She tapped the brass bell lightly, not ringing like a cat testing a piano key. "Can we talk somewhere no chandelier is listening?" I led her into the tiny office behind the counter, where the walls wore framed reviews like armor. She didn't sit. Neither did I. She put a business card on the desk but slid it halfway under a paperclip as if it were shy. "Ivy Tan, Glassworks," it read. The card had been sandblasted until the letters felt like secrets under my fingertip. "Ivy," I said, because saying a stranger's name out loud makes the room admit she's not a ghost. "Your mark," she said. I asked the night porter with the sleepy eyes and the good posture. "And you left me a picture of my wife." She exhaled softly, as if she'd been holding her breath since Tuesday began. "I wasn't sure she was your wife," she said. "I only knew she was the woman I keep seeing in the background, and I knew you work when the building's honest." "You could have just told me," I said. "People used to do that." "Would you have believed me?" Ivy asked. "Words feel like they want something. Pictures just show up and take the chair." In the photo, Jenna's hand tilted toward a man's wrist with a watch I recognized from loud rooms. On his first stay, he had tipped in folded halves of 20s as if he didn't want the full faces to see him. He signed the register like men do when they'd prefer aliases but have jobs that require taxes. Evan Park. Charming the way a tide can be charming if you don't mind losing your shoes. He had a voice that wore its good schools like a cologne. Ivy watched me watch the picture. "He's my partner," she said, as if the word had to earn its rights. "Officially on paper in our apartment lease in the photo albums my mother keeps like proof of concept. He's a photographer, you probably guessed. He likes what glass does to light. He likes making people look like they were born to be seen." She gave a small shrug. "I file the receipts. I know which nights he says he'll be late." "How many pictures like that are there?" I asked. Enough to let the story have a spine, she said. Not enough to make a museum. The world tilted slightly. I put a hand on the desk to steady the map on it and my heart under it. What do you want from me? I asked. For you to not be blindsided in your own house, Ivy said. And maybe, if we're going to be the ones who didn't know, at least we can be the ones who decide what to do with knowing. Why bring it here? Why not my mailbox? Because your mailbox is where you eat breakfast, she said. This is where you're strongest, and I needed to borrow that. I wanted to be furious. Instead, I felt as if someone had moved a bookshelf and found a window, and the view was both beautiful and wrong. The greenhouse in the Polaroid had been my idea when we renovated, a promise to the owners that a place for plants would make people behave better. The halcyon sold it in brochures as a sky garden where privacy is a courtesy, not a crime. I had written that line. Now it felt like I'd carved out a confessional I hadn't meant to build. Will you meet me upstairs? Ivy asked. Not to catch them. She saw my shoulders stiffen. God, no, to stand where the picture was taken and say out loud that we're not crazy. We went up by the service elevator because it was honest about being ugly. The greenhouse door gave the flirtatious squeak it gives at midnight. The city beyond the glass was a bowl of dimmed jewelry. The two chairs by the table tilted toward each other like conspirators who had fallen asleep mid-plan. The fern had grown even more immodest. We stood in the place the hands in the photo had been. The night felt different around the truth, lighter and heavier at the same time. I'm sorry, Ivy said quietly. I didn't come to make you lose anything. I came because I was tired of misplacing myself. We didn't cry, not then. We looked at the chairs as if they might confess. I picked up a lipstick-stained napkin from under the table and folded it into a precise square, as if the neatness mattered. Ivy leaned against the glass. The city pressed its cool ear against us. Okay, I said finally. No scenes, no humiliations. We talk like grown-ups in daylight. That aloud, she asked, and her laugh did something complicated in my chest. Good. I hate the sound of voices that want to be doors slamming. We drafted our plan at the concierge desk with the calm of people arranging a brunch reservation. I would ask Jenna for Sunday coffee at the place where the tables are small and the walls pretend their paint is older than it is. Ivy would have her conversation with Evan on their balcony where their basil plant always refuses to die. We would not weaponize each other's names. We would not meet again unless we needed sanity like an oxygen tank. Thank you, she said, and for a second her hand grazed mine on the counter. It wasn't flirtation. It was a handshake with the volume turned down to something like gratitude. I slept 3 hours and then went home to the kitchen with the clementine bowl and the ceramic fox cookie jar Jenna swore was minimalist. She came out in one of my t-shirts, hair flattened into a contrail down one side. For a beat, I saw the girl who had danced with me on moving day in a living room full of boxes, who had insisted blankets counted as furniture if you stacked them right. Then the woman who had been at the greenhouse flickered across her face like a bad projection. Coffee Sunday? I asked. She looked surprised and then careful. Yes, she said, I'd like that. At the cafe, I told her what I knew. Not the green shade of the ferns or the watch on the wrist. Not the picture Ivy had pressed into my palm like a witness. Just the marrow of it. I told her I didn't want to perform. I told her I loved who we had been and didn't recognize who we were rehearsing to be. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I wanted to feel like a main character, she said when she could make the words behave. And then I realized I wasn't even in my own scene. I was in someone else, in borrowed lighting. We can stop borrowing, I said. We can give everything back. She covered her mouth with her hand, the silver band flashing like a siren and then going quiet. "I'm sorry," she said, and the apology sounded like the kind that belongs to both of us, like the ones people say at train stations when the wrong schedules finally line up. We talked about practicalities. We talked about the lemon squeezer and who would get the Fox cookie jar, and whether the basil in our window was a survivor or a martyr. We didn't talk about Evan. We didn't talk about Ivy. I mailed Jenna the Polaroid later with a note that said simply, "I found this at work. It's your call." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. A week slid past like a hotel sheet. I worked. I slept in the bed that had suddenly become excellent at its job. I learned how quiet the refrigerator is at 2 in the morning. On Friday, a small package arrived at the front desk wrapped in brown paper like books used to be. Inside was a little glass charm, the kind you hang in a window to see rainbows try out your walls. It was a circle with a hair-thin flaw that looked like a breath held too long. The note was 2 words, "For clarity." No signature, it didn't need one. I saw Ivy again in the middle of a rain that couldn't decide if it wanted to be dramatic. She came into the lobby shaking droplets from her coat like a dog who refuses to apologize for joy. "You have my favorite carpet," she said, as if that were a normal greeting between conspirators who had decided not to be conspirators. "It doesn't pretend it hasn't seen everything." I poured us tea in the office because a bar felt like asking the story to put on eyeliner. We sat in the companionable silence of people not performing inside their own lives. "How did it go?" I asked. "He cried," she said, not satisfied, not triumphant, just telling a weather report. "I cried too, different climates. We agreed to spin separate orbits for a while and see if we still want the same sun." "And you?" I asked. "I want sleep that doesn't bargain," she said. "And I want things that don't require press releases." We laughed then at nothing, at everything, at how light came through the office blinds and made the dust look like confetti that had retired. When our laughter faded, we sat with the heat of the tea between our palms. I noticed the small scar on Ivy's wrist, round as a candle burn. She noticed me noticing. "Kiln bite," she said. "Glass teaches by kissing." After her second cup, she looked at the lobby like it had changed frames. "You ever think the rooms upstairs are stories people don't have to write down?" she asked. "All the time," I said. "I just file the endings." "If we were a room," she said, "what would our brochure say?" I considered. Sunlight, privacy optional, quiet on purpose, heat included. She blushed a little as if the word heat had run a finger down her spine. "Fair warning," she said. "I am not a rebound. I come with plants that need watering and a sink that hates forks, and I am ruthlessly allergic to lies." "I am building a religion out of truth," I said. "Monthly services, no choir." We grinned at each other like we'd invented a holiday. We left the hotel together at midnight because it seemed like a time that didn't belong to anyone else. The rain had tired itself out, leaving the streets reflective, a city studying itself. Ivy's studio was 2 blocks away in a building that used to be a bakery and now smelled like heat and hope. The kilns hummed low, a cat purring in a room it owned. She showed me sheets of glass leaning against the wall like piano-lid notes, colors you couldn't name without making up words. "This one is night water," she said. "This one is bruised apricot. This one is just stop." She said it with reverence and mischief, an artist's prayer. We stood near the kiln, its warmth settling into our coats, and looked at each other the way you do when you can feel your life deciding it prefers this version. I reached up, slow enough to ask, and slid a stray hair behind her ear. Her breath hitched, then smoothed like a record finding the groove. She leaned closer, not accident, not apology, and we kissed with the respect of people taking off a uniform at the end of a long shift. It wasn't fireworks, Fireworks are for crowds. It was heat meeting heat and deciding to speak quietly. Her hands found my shoulders, mine found the small of her back. We didn't rush. If you pour glass too fast, it shatters. If you pour it right, it becomes a window. When our mouths parted, we stayed close, foreheads touching, the warm air making the moment hum like a neon sign that's never learned to whisper. "I don't want to be a correction," she said, the words soft but unflinching. "I want to be a choice." "You are," I said, and telling the truth felt like sleep finally coming home. We didn't fall into a bed because we didn't need a stage. We drifted to her couch with its ridiculous wool blanket that shed on everything, and we talked with our knees touching and our fingers learning new maps. The city kept breathing outside the window. When her head rested on my shoulder, it fit like a thing that had waited at the back of a closet for years, patient and perfect. We gave the story time. We kept our jobs and our plants alive. On Sundays, we went to the flea market and bought nothing, two people with pockets full of lint and new plans. I changed the hotel brochures to remove the line about privacy being a courtesy. Now they say, "We keep your quiet safe." Ivy hung the glass charm in her studio window, and in the afternoons I watched the light throw small rainbows across her forearms as she worked, tiny proofs that the day had hands. Jenna sent me an invitation to her new place warming 3 months after the coffee. It wasn't a trap. It was an out-breath. I went, dropped off a basil plant, hugged the friends we did not divide. We were polite, the kind of polite that means we've both decided to be kinder than we were. I left before the speeches because some endings don't need my applause. The halcyon still keeps secrets. It always will. Sometimes when I go up to the greenhouse to water the fern, I think about how many rooms it takes to build a life and how many windows to keep it honest. Ivy meets me there sometimes with a paper bag of croissants and a thermos of tea that tastes like mint and maybe forgiveness. We sit on the chairs that used to have a different job, and we watch the city be brave. One night late, the elevator opened and a couple stepped out, laughing the laugh of people who have decided to stay. They didn't see us. Ivy slid her hand into mine, not to claim but to confirm. The glass around us held our reflections like a promise. We were not a revenge story, not an alibi, not an accident that got good at acting. We were the midnight check, and you choose on purpose, the room you enter with your eyes open, the heat you keep because it's yours. And when the chandelier downstairs sighed and finally looked like a constellation again, we knew which stars we were.